Hi folks, you're with Tacitus today at your Pushback channel, Tacitus today, and thank you for joining this audio live stream. In this essay, I'd like to talk about the propaganda that's been doing the rounds about what's referred to as food security. And I think the globalists and the UN and all the activists are going to try and marry the global warming propaganda, and they'll introduce a new sort of side element, which has been discussed, but they're ginning it up now, about food security. Well, what does food security mean? Well, it's a slogan and a political term. So it means, in effect, whatever they want to mean, but it's meant to have, they're trying to create a resonance. What food security means is little babies dying on the street, little girls dressed in pink, starving. And that's why they have to come to the first world West, because they're starving over there. Do you want little girls in pink to die, you fucking Nazi? So food security is being used to justify, in part at least, the mass migration thing that the globalists are pushing. Now, the migration thing is only going one way. It's going from poor countries to the rich countries. If it was going all over the place, then who would care? But it's only a one-way mass migration. Now, the argument by the activists is that part of the reason, and this reason will increase, is that food security, wherever there is food insecurity, rather, that food insecurity will create or generate or bring about mass migration. So we must accept that. We must accept it. And there is no way we can not accept it. And if the rich white countries don't accept this mass migration from food insecure areas, then that means they're all fucking Nazis. So that's the argument. Now, let's just sort of delve into this a little bit. The definition of food insecurity is a relative term. So if you get to eat, for example, if you get to eat one chocolate cake a week in the rich white West, and someone in Central Africa does not get to eat a chocolate cake once a week, then they have food insecurity, and therefore they are justified in moving to the West. So they've got a very fluid definition of what food security is. Now, while they're pushing that propaganda and that nonsense and silliness, they're also saying that the world has to change because it can't feed the population it has, and it's going to hit 10 billion, supposedly going to hit 10 billion in the next 20 years or so, world population. And that's going to be the tipping point when there's going to be mass starvation and yada, yada. So they're also saying, well, food insecurity in the poor countries, the badly managed basket case countries, that in fact should be producing food surpluses, but because of the piss poor mismanagement, they're not, that those people should be able to come to the white West where there is better management of food resources or more. I'm not really sure how that works, but we can come back to that. And also that the world population will reach a point where the world can't feed that many people anyway. But at the same time, the world has to reduce its production of foodstuffs by reducing the use of fertilizers. Now, the removing fertilizers from all food production, and the efficient use of fertilizers at least happens in the first world, and much less so in the third world or the developing world. So we've got this also situation where at the same time, because of global warming and and nitrogen and cows farting, there has to be a reduction of around 30%, give or take, in food production or farm food production, because of moving away from fertilizers into strictly natural or organic farming. How it was before the agricultural revolution in the late 1700s. So we're going to go back 250 years in farm style production in order to achieve something for the planet, is it? I'm not quite sure. No one's been able to explain that to me yet. That argument is delivered by assertion. We know that we have to change, therefore, and then they go straight off on their little tangent there. But hold on, wait. We know we have to change. Why? How? Who says we have to change? So the people need to challenge that assertion. The interviewers on the current affairs and news shows and so on, and they don't. Currently, they're not. So here's the rub. So we need to, people from the third world, because they have food insecurity due to basket case economies, mismanagement, civil wars, and so on. But instead of accepting or agreeing with that, say, no, climate change. That's climate change. Well, no, it's not. How can you say when a country is in the midst of this civil war that was once a big surplus producer of food, they're in the middle of this ongoing, forever lasting civil war and tribal and religious conflict and yada yada. They're in all of this, and that's you're saying, well, those civil wars never got nothing to do with it, burning each other's crops, the tribes trashing each other's farms. That's got nothing to do with it. It's climate change. Climate change, and just assert it's climate change. Therefore, these people are justified in moving to a white country. No, they're not. So there's that. And then at the same time, food production has to be reduced, and at the same time, population is too great. Now, there's another element that they seem to ignore, that a peasant living in the middle of some basket case in Africa is consuming a certain amount of calories. So a lot of this is subsistence farming, by the way, not a measured economic exchange where you go and buy your food at the local store or something. They're subsistence farmers, so they're catching stuff in the jungle, or they've got their little plots of land and they're living subsistence lifestyles from that. So it's not a recorded financial transaction. So it's hard to determine, say, what the calorie intake might be and these sorts of things. So the idea is to move those people from the basket case rural village that they're in Africa, and then move them to the first world, where their consumption of these so-called scarce resources, food that they're pushing in this case, the consumption of resources will be infinitely greater than it was when it was in Africa. So, and then that's a bad thing. Therefore, all the white people have to reduce their consumption because the world is short of food or something. I mean, this is insane. I mean, where does this go? So you move the illiterate peasants from the third world into the first world, and then tell the people already in the first world, well, you have to reduce your standard of living. You have to eat and consume less. You have to go with that more because we just brought all these people in that you never wanted and voted for anyway. I mean, holy fuck. So, but this food insecurity thing is again, as they marry it up to climate change, is a big thing. And I can see they're pushing it more and more. But the basic thrust of it is that we must accept food insecurity is here. We must accept it's caused by climate change. We must accept mass migration of people from the third world to the first world. All right, then, well, hold on a minute. Let's say a country like, depending on whose numbers you use, a country like Germany, say, imports 10% of its food. Now, this is relative to overall merchandise imports. It's a little bit hard to figure. Germany agriculture does very well. They do export a lot of stuff around Europe. Some of the stuff, a lot of the stuff they get, foodstuffs, come in from other European countries. So, say, I don't know, wine from France, for example, or cheese from Holland, or chocolate from Switzerland. Those sorts of things. But Germany is quite a big agricultural. They're one of the largest agricultural exporters in Europe, for example, or the world. So they do rather well. So they don't have a huge intake of food imports of foodstuffs. Let's suppose they go down the path of not using any fertilizers, as the World Economic Forum and the UN and all these. I mean, they're currently trying to muscle Holland into doing that. Close all these farms and stop using fertilizers and this sort of thing. So Germany's food production will drop by 30%. That means they would need to import a lot more food than they currently are. And particularly with things like livestock. So the only place they've got to go is manufactured food, the factory manufactured meat equivalents or vegetable equivalents, or these sorts of things. I'll go back to, say, Lost in Space in 1959. They produced this outer space show that was meant to be talking about the 1990s. or the perception in the 1950s of what the 1990s would look like going to outer space to all these planets. And so food was really reduced to tablets. So you could get a tablet, which was chicken sandwiches, for example, and the tablet would contain as many, if not more, nutrients and I don't know, good stuff as would an actual chicken sandwich, a real chicken sandwich. So everything was tablets. So you would have 2 or 3 tablets for your evening meal or any meal, and that would be it. So the need to have fresh food or food of any description, grown food, cultivated food was just not there. You just take the tablet. So with the factory manufactured food, then it would appear we're heading in that direction. But if food production is decreased by 30% in the Western world, which is by far and away the biggest food producers, then the need to import food would be beyond the capacity of the world to sustain, and particularly with the moving of third world peasants from the third world into the first world, which is dramatically increasing consumption of all the things that are supposed to be scarce. Now, if they are as scarce as the globalists claim, which is one of the central planks of their "we all have to change," if it is those resources are as scarce, then why would you shovel people that have tiny resource usage footprints in Africa and elsewhere? Why would you then move them from there to the first world, where they have infinitely greater footprints of the very resources you say are scarce and we're running out of, and which is the reason we have to supposedly change the way we live? I mean, that's insane. That's got to be the most counterproductive, assuming what they say is true, and I don't agree with it. But it's got to be most counterproductive. So they put the argument, this is the problem, and then they exacerbate the problem and call you a Nazi if you notice it. So these are the things that of the food security or insecurity as they're going to push it. Food security. Now, Britain that imports somewhere around 50% of its total food consumption. Then why is mass migration to Britain going off the scales when Britain can't feed? Britain is already food insecure. The definition of food insecurity is you can't feed your population. And Britain can't feed its population. It can only feed it through imports. And the food insecurity argument is that if you can't produce enough food in your region to feed the people that are there, and this is the equation they use for Africa and Pakistan and all these sort of places, if you can't feed the people there, then you have food insecurity, which means those people are allowed to move to the first world. But wait a minute. Most of the first, not all, but most of the first world countries are importing food of some sort. And if you increase the population at the rate that they're trying to and are doing, then that food insecurity will only get worse. So does that mean that people have to be moved from the first world to the third world? Does it mean that the third world, places like Uganda and South Africa that used to produce quite large food surplus because of mismanagement of black governments, because of mismanagement of civil war and goodness knows what, and because of population explosions? Ethiopia has a population more than double the agricultural carrying capacity of that nation. So depopulation is on the table. Now, I was looking at one commentator who's again uses the absurd thing: food insecurity means we can all move to the West. All the peasants from Africa and elsewhere, Pakistan, can move to the West. But at the same time, how do you equate for the argument that this particular guy put forward was we can't decrease consumption. We have to make consumption. We have to have different patterns of consumption, and we have to have depopulation. Now, what does that depopulation mean? Does that mean they're going to release deadly pandemics that conveniently kill off the surplus population? Because in the third world there are billions. There's at least 2.5 billion with a B people on the planet who are surplus population. They've got nothing to do. They've got nowhere to go. They've got no future. They're living hand to mouth on a daily basis and already dying like flies. So 2.5 billion of them, all of whom want to move to the rich West. So how is this going to play out in terms of what does food insecurity mean? Britain can't feed itself as it is. Are they food insecure? Well, they can afford to import food, but does that change the food insecurity? And again, if Britain goes completely organic, stops using fertilizers, which is what the World Economic Forum wants, then they're going to need 70 or 80% of their food requirements imported. So clearly we're being shepherded and corralled and pushed into factory produced food. So no longer will you grow vegetables in your plot of land or on a farm. It'll be farming land will be used for housing illegal aliens and that sort of stuff. That factories will produce the food, and they'll be produced under monopoly or cartel conditions. I think that's where they're heading with it. But I think the food insecurity is the scare the crap out of them first step, and then say, "Oh, we'll rescue you, we'll save you by giving you these chicken sandwich tablets, and that'll fix everything." I think that's where it's heading. But I'll be interested to see your comments below. You've been a Tacitus today, your Pushback channel, and thank you for listening.